conducted his research and the more people he interviewed, the more he realized, wait a second, not all of these eyewitnesses are crazy. In many cases, these eyewitnesses were not alone when they experienced their encounters or when they saw something.
He began to realize how long, and these are his exact words, how long am I going to call these people crazy or incompetent? Some of them were seeing as something very, very unexplainable and they should be investigated further.
For more than a decade, Dr. Hynek helped the Air Force carry out its agenda, assuring the public that UFOs were nothing to be concerned about. But that will begin to change in 1963, when Hynek gained a fierce ally in his pursuit to make the government take the study of UFOs more seriously. Dr. Jacques Vallée. Evanston, Illinois, 1963. J. Allen Hynek is entering his 11th year as the scientific advisor to Project Blue Book, and is now also the chair of Northwestern University's astronomy department. In the spring, the 53-year-old professor meets a young French astronomer and computer science student named Jacques Vallée.
One of the most important meetings that Hynek had in his life was when he first came across Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée was himself an astronomer, an astrophysicist, really, and he was also an early computer pioneer.
While working as an astronomer at the Paris Observatory, Vallée had conducted extensive research about UFO activity throughout Europe. Hynek was eager to see Vallée's research, but what impressed him the most was that Vallée had created a computer database to analyze all of the data.
What I found when developing the catalog of sightings, there were a number of patterns which were interesting. And in late '63, I traveled to Chicago and met with Dr. Hynek and started to compare notes to see if those patterns in Europe are the same as the patterns in the United States.
When Jacques Vallée came into the picture, a dynamic duo was formed that was unstoppable because Vallée helped Hynek computerize everything. That was the next level in UFO research. Vallée has a very scientific orientation towards the subjects. Together, they both have an intuition that this is an extraterrestrial phenomenon and it needs to be treated as such.
We started to look at patterns in the behavior of UFO phenomena, and we started finding things that had not been published before, had not been understood before. Dr. Hynek said, this fellow is brilliant, he's respected in the scientific world, and he's coming out with these ideas that I would like to explore more. And I think when Jacques Vallée said, this is what I believe, and I'm not afraid to say this, Hynek felt relieved. Jacques was a very frequent guest along with his wife and kids at our house. He had a great passion for astronomy. He saw a fascinating phenomena, and he wanted to go where the science led them. I could see the special fondness and reverence my father had for Jacques.
Working with Vallée and his database, Hynek encountered more and more UFO sightings that could not be easily explained. But perhaps the most compelling case he would investigate not only had the report of an object in the sky, but evidence
seem to be traumatized. I've visited Socorro a number of times, trying, frankly, to break down the man's character, try to find out whether he's capable of the hoax and what his reputation's like. And I've inquired people who've known him all his life, and even some parents of some of my students happen to live in Socorro, and I've gone about tried that. And Zamora has always held up. His character has simply held up as a solid American citizen cop.
J. Allen Hynek, realizing Ronnie Zamora was not a fabricator, that what he was saying was an experience that he believed he actually experienced. And that may have had something to do with J. Allen Hynek perhaps starting to come around the corner and change his position on the topic.
Jacques told me that it was this case that was more or less the straw that broke the camel's back to make my father feel comfortable talking about UFO reports with sightings of aliens. This was the first case where he said, yes, these were creatures, because there were traces of footsteps that were not human footsteps. It was a turning point because there was no question something had happened. We had to take landings seriously.
Despite the evidence collected in New Mexico, the Air Force insisted that Hynek towed the company line, and he dropped the investigation. Hynek's frustration with the military's policy of denial was at an all-time high. And when another extraordinary UFO event occurred 2 years later, the acclaimed astronomer would no longer stay quiet. Evanston, Illinois, March 1966. J. Allen Hynek, now in his 14th year with Project Blue Book, is at home when he catches a curious segment on the evening news. According to the report, a farmer in rural Michigan named Frank Manor witnessed a UFO flying above his property.
I went to north of me, and looked like a falling star. Air went kind of coming down, and when it got to the top of the trees, it stopped, and a blue and a bright light come on. And I looked at it, and I thought I was seeing things.
In addition to Frank Manor, many other residents across southern Michigan saw the UFO, including a member of law enforcement, Sheriff Sergeant Newell Snyder, who drew a sketch of the flying craft.
It's momentary rapidly at any speed or whether any direction can go. What do you think it was? I don't think I had a common saucer, that's what it was.
Over the next few nights, dozens more UFO sightings were reported.
The 1966 UFO flight over Michigan happened over several days. And hundreds of witnesses saw these weird flying saucer lights in the sky. And was big news at the time. Dr. Hynek calls his boss at Project Blue Book and he says, hey, something big is going on in Michigan. And his boss says, you go to Michigan, wipe out the whole thing, make it like it never happened.
Hynek traveled to Michigan to investigate the sightings. And on March 25th, he released his conclusions to the press. He claimed that the most likely cause of the lights seen by witnesses was not extraterrestrial activity, but marsh gas.
I cannot prove in a court of law that marsh gas is the full explanation of these sightings. But it does appear to me extremely likely.
You say, Doctor, that Michigan is now producing non-existent saucers?
Well, that's one way of putting it, I suppose.
Hynek's conclusion sparked outrage nationwide. He was ridiculed by pundits, op-ed columnists, and cartoonists, who viewed him as the ultimate government pawn.
Absolute embarrassing debacle for him. No one believed this, so this became the national joke.
Michigan, that was a tough moment for him. He really didn't know what to make of it, but he was under a lot of pressure to say something. And he went with that.
I remember the swamp gas incident. I remember actually seeing him on TV. And I could just see in his face that it was just not something he wanted to do.
After his disastrous press conference, Hynek was summoned to Washington, D.C. to testify before Congress. And for the first time, he defied his superiors on Project Blue Book and revealed his true thoughts on the UFO phenomenon.
Hynek gets in front of this committee and says to them, UFOs are a worthy study, and it needs scientific investigation. He's had enough. And he says, no, there's a scientific problem with UFOs. We need to take it serious.
Hynek said that when he made his official statement about how he felt about UFOs, he got into serious trouble with the Air Force. I don't think they did much of anything to him, but they cut him off from support, is what they did.
After Hynek's controversial testimony, the Air Force opened an investigation into Project Blue Book, chaired by physicist Edward Condon, called the Condon Committee. By the end of 1969, the Condon Committee terminated Project Blue Book, and J. Allen Hynek was finally free to speak openly about UFOs.
In my association with Project Blue Book, I know very well that it was not a scientific topic. I also know that they never would notify the media when an interesting case came up. They did everything they could to keep it going. J. Allen Hynek became a well-known figure on television, on radio, talking about aerial phenomena, and in doing so, he became, well, Mr. UFO. I guess the first one that ever was. And he really took this whole research topic to another level.
My parents were a bit concerned about his mainstream reputation being damaged. It was so different than it is now as far as if somebody talked about UFOs, they could lose their careers, their kids could be hounded at school. So there was a real stigma back then. But I don't think it slowed my father down. It was a brave thing to do.
After spending more than 20 years helping the U.S. government convince the public that there is nothing mysterious in our skies, Hynek was now leading the charge to legitimize the study of UFOs. And he would soon reach a larger audience than ever before with the help of Steven Spielberg. Evanston, Illinois, 1972. After investigating UFOs for more than 24 years, J. Allen Hynek publishes his first book on the phenomenon, The UFO Experience.
It's an instant bestseller, mega bestseller. One of the key elements in the book is the close encounter classification. This becomes a framework for people to categorize their UFO experience. Is it a close encounter of the first kind? In other words, did you see something less than 500 feet away? A close encounter of the second kind, was there a physical effect that was felt? Was there a burn mark? Is there physical evidence left by perhaps a landing of the craft? And then the close encounter of the third kind, which is the sighting of an animated figure, be it a humanoid being or perhaps a robot, within or near that craft.
Today, more than 5 decades after he introduced it, Hynek's Close Encounters classification system remains the standard by which UFO reports are defined. But even more influential was the research facility he launched in Evanston, Illinois, just 1 year after the publication of his first book, called the Center for UFO Studies. Essentially became a global hub for anyone to go and report their UFO sightings. But he couldn't do it by himself, so he raised a whole bunch of money and all of a sudden had staff. He was able to do a lot more research than he had ever been able to do before.
My father felt it was important to set up a 1-800 number
And he was very free giving his phone number, the home phone number. And so in those days, the phone was always ringing off the hook. But he was always happy to, take the call. What motivated him was the idea that UFOs could open up a whole new domain of physics, that it could increase our understanding of reality. That really propelled him.
My father traveled more than anybody I've ever met. And so my mom was left to take care of the kids to a great deal. She was fiercely independent, very strong, and at first, I think she must have been hesitant to have my father go off on these wild goose chases for flying saucers, but after a while she caught the bug too, and became an active participant in the Center for UFO Studies, and I think she really helped comfort a lot of people, gently coaxing them into talking a little bit more about what could be a very traumatic time.
It seemed a really exciting time for my father, a blossoming time. I remember coming home and our house had been transformed. My bedroom was no longer my bedroom, and the same with most of the others, so it was this hubbub. And files and papers and phones, and it was an exciting time, and I think he really enjoyed that a lot.
Ufologist Phil Imbrogno worked with Dr. Hynek in the early 1980s, investigating UFO sightings in New York's Hudson Valley. According to him, Hynek's passion for investigating the phenomenon was unmatched.
If he thought that the sightings were worth a value to give UFOs more credibility and more attention in the scientific world, he was there. And his energy was unbelievable in the field. I was only 30-something years old, and he was in his 70s, and I was exhausted before he was, and he just kept on going. And when interviewing witnesses, he made them feel so comfortable that they just opened up to him.
3 years after launching the Center for UFO Studies, J. Allen Hynek received a phone call from Hollywood's hottest new director, Steven Spielberg. Spielberg wanted the distinguished Dr. Hynek to consult on his new film, called Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Our father was all for it, being a technical advisor on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And people were taking it seriously. And that's what he loved about it. Hynek even has a cameo role right at the end of it, the climactic scene when the mothership comes down. You can see there's one guy with a goatee and a pipe, and that's Hynek.
I still, when I see it, I always get just sort of when he comes on for his cameo.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind premiered on November 15, 1977, and went on to become a box office smash and a critical success. But perhaps most important to Hynek was the fact that the movie established the UFO phenomenon in the mainstream.
The movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind was truly a watershed moment in the phenomenon. The movie did so much service for people who felt they had sightings in legitimizing them to come forward.
The movie raised public awareness of UFO phenomena to new heights. One of the offshoots of the popularity of this movie was Hynek was able to persuade Spielberg to print the contact information for his Center for UFO Studies on every single movie poster for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Bottom corner of the poster, there's going to be a little notation. If you've seen anything unusual, contact CUFOS.
Shortly after the release of the film, Hynek retired from teaching and eventually relocated the Center for UFO Studies to Phoenix, Arizona. In his final years, he continued to travel the world investigating UFOs and proposed profound new possibilities for what might be behind the phenomenon. Hestelen, Norway. In 1981, the residents of a small mountain village began reporting strange lights of various colors, sizes, and shapes. his surprise, Hynek was not only receptive, but in 1985, at 74 years old, he traveled to Hessdalen to witness the phenomenon for himself.
Everyone in Scandinavia knew who he was. And he came to visit us out in the field in Norway. That inspired us very much. Such a great man.
Now, the fact that they actually saw those lights against the mountain, I think, is very important.
Most of the video from Hynek's visit has been lost, but the fragments that have survived represent the last footage ever shot of the pioneering scientist and ufologist. In it, he reveals that in his final assessment of the UFO phenomenon, an extraterrestrial intelligence is just one of numerous profound possibilities.
When all is said and done, it represents some form of intelligence, but whether that intelligence is from great distances away, or whether it is perhaps much closer to us in a parallel reality or another dimension, or whether it is in some strange way a product of our own intelligence, our own psyche, I don't know.
One of the things I really love about my dad is that he was open to entertaining things that weren't just a fixed solution. He didn't have to wrap things up so that you couldn't continue exploring. I love that aspect of my dad.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek passed away from a malignant brain tumor in 1986 as Halley's Comet was passing by the planet. It was the first time the comet had been visible from Earth since 1910, the year Hynek was born.
He came and went with Halley's Comet, which is a really nice kind of comforting cosmological bookend for a grieving son.
I'm very proud of my father. He was a serious scientist looking into UFOs, and it was not cool for a scientist to be doing that on this silly subject. So he battled that a lot, and I think he will be appreciated by UFO advocates and serious scientists.
My father's legacy is that he was a very believable figure. He was the archetypal professor. And if this guy says there's something happening here, maybe it's okay if I believe that too. So I think he was able to put the world on his back and bring us just a little bit closer to accepting the idea that we are not alone.
Dr. Hynek used to say that what's important in science is the exception. So much of science, scientific discovery, is based on an exception. So the things that break the rule, and I think that's why UFOs are important, because they break the rule.
It's because of J. Allen Hynek, I think we are where we are today in this topic. J. Allen Hynek was the right person at the right time. From a young boy fascinated with astronomy, to a government UFO debunker, to a founding father of ufology, J. Allen Hynek lived his life with one foot planted in hard science and the other in the unknown. And in the end, his investigations, both in the academic world